Let's move over to Kansas State here. I mean, talking about a team that's coming off a really good season. Colin Klein, of course, goes over to um Texas A&M to be the offensive coordinator there. Enter Connor Riley, Matt Woods as co-offensive coordinators there. It's going to be a keystone sort of year because Avery Johnson's going to have his chance to start for a full season, and we know how high the folks in Manhattan are on Avery Johnson. I mean, he was 37 to 66 for 479 yards, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions, 311 rushing yards for 7 touchdowns in his limited action last year. Um, yeah, it's pretty good, and it's pretty telling that he's really good because like almost every scholarship quarterback transferred out of there. So, um, including Will Howard himself, who, if you ask the beat writers, they'd say that Avery Johnson was going to beat out Will Howard. I don't know that for sure, but Avery Johnson, the hype around him certainly is pretty big.
Yeah, I will say just to hinder expectations just a little bit, and I am high on him too. I do think those stats a little bit inflated from that Texas Tech game. It was a small sample size. He was playing in every game, right? Because he's just too good to keep off the field. But at Texas Tech, he was 8 for 9, 77 yards. He had 5 rushing touchdowns, which adds to that total, obviously, a
It's just
little bit more of
crazy.
an outlier, which, by the way, it speaks to how dynamic he is. And I'm not taking that away from him at all. But in terms of, oh, he only had limited action. He had 12 touchdowns, blah, blah, blah. What's he going to do with the full year starting? I wouldn't expect that pace to continue. But the reality is, yeah, I am with those beat writers. I am really, really high on Johnson, Avery Johnson, what he can do. He's 6'2", 192, absolute blazer, Kansas kid, which you love, over there in Manhattan. I know they love their in-state kids as much as they can get them. And yeah, he was a nice recruit coming out of the portal class, or I'm sorry, coming out of the 2023 recruiting class. And the future is bright there. I mean, he's got at least one more year after this one. Is it about, can he stay healthy? How much are they going to run him? Did he put on some weights? And what's that all going to look like? But the reality is, he's a really good quarterback.
Yeah, and I don't hate Taquan Roberson if Avery Johnson goes down. Obviously, that's a huge downgrade. Um, but we'll see
Similar,
because he's gonna be used in the run a ton.
yeah,
Durability is a question that you have to ask, right? And Avery Johnson hasn't had that problem yet, right? But that doesn't mean that in that kind of offense, that's a really run heavy offense, right? A guy like DJ getting at 250 touches last year, which we'll get to in a second. It's gonna be run heavy, so we'll see how they use Avery Johnson in that as well.
definitely. And yeah, so I guess we'll talk about the running backs here. DJ Giddens, just so good. He can be a three down back. He can do everything. You heard Chris Kleiman talk him up at Big 12 Media Days. He talked about his growth as a pass protector, which is really nice this past year. And then you're bringing in a guy like Dylan Edwards, who has been a longtime friend of Avery Johnson, also from Kansas as well. In that same recruiting class of 2023, was, I think, a former Kansas State commit before flipping to Notre Dame and ultimately flipping to Deion Sanders in Colorado. We saw how dynamic he was in week 1 last year against TCU. It didn't really last all season. A lot happened on that offense. I don't necessarily blame him. And by the way, he's also a true freshman. So consistency and whatnot, durability throughout the season is not necessarily something you're going to expect or hold against the kid, especially backing up a guy like Giddens. I think it's a perfect fit. I mean, Giddens is 6'1", 212, and Edwards is 5'9", 170 on a good day, right? But he is explosive. He puts stress on the defense, and him and Johnson back there, the big play possibility is something that the teams are going to have to be aware of. And I don't know. I know they don't do a ton of two back sets there, or at least with Colin Klein they didn't. But you bring in Connor Riley, Matt Wells, right? Maybe you get all those guys on the field and you have a nice little full house back there of Avery Johnson, DJ Giddens, Dylan Edwards, and you just really um kind of loosen things up, I guess, for your playmakers outside.
Yeah, sorry, I think I said Matt Woods earlier. I meant to say Matt Wells. That's my fault there. But So then, what are your thoughts on this wide receiver room going into 2024?
I think they feel good about it. At Kansas State does internally. I think if you look on the
I
outside
don't
looking
hate it.
in, you're yes, I think nationally, I think you see that their stats, and you're like, well, I don't know. I mean, you lose Newton Brooks, and it's like, well, what's going on there? But I think Jace Brown and Keegan Johnson, I think those are really nice returning building blocks to build into next year. Brown's a guy that was a true freshman, and he had over 400 yards. And he's a really good deep threat for you at over 16 yards per carry last year. I think you can use the talented arm that is Avery Johnson, especially if let's say you're gashing them through the run and you're going to have to bring a safety into the box or whatnot. The play action pass, the deep overs over the middle, it's going to be open for you, I think. And if you can hit those plays, I think Jace Brown's going to be a guy that definitely benefits from that. I mentioned Keegan Johnson, former Iowa guy, struggled with injuries last year, but he's a veteran as well. I think they really respect him there and what he can do consistently, right? And then Dante Cephas, guy, man, was I high on him last year for Penn State. Didn't quite click there. I don't know exactly why. A lot of things happened in that offense there. Part of the reason why Kolonecki over from Kansas is there at Penn State now. But Cephas, I think, fits a little bit better here than he did there. And we'll see if he can, not necessarily replicate what he did at Kent State, but if he can get back somewhere close to the production and I guess the talent level that he had there, he displayed there, would be pretty exciting. But it sounds like that they're deeper than they have been, and that they're excited to use them, right? And maybe you're going to see more four wide receiver sets than you would typically see with a Kansas State offense.
Yeah, I agree. I like Keegan Brown or Keegan Johnson a lot. He's a guy. He's a highly rated recruit. Has all the talent in the world, and we've seen receivers. There's a formula there of taking those Iowa receivers and putting them in good situations and letting them turn out. So I think Keegan Johnson can definitely be a really, really, really good option for them. Garrett Oakley's solid. I don't know that he's a perfect replacement for Benson Newt, but he's okay. He's okay. But yeah, I think the most interesting thing to look at this offense is the offensive line position battles that you're going to see heading into the fall, right? You know Cooper Beebe, right? Of course, is a big deal. NFL caliber player, was fantastic, one of the better guards in college football last year. But you add Easton Kilty from North Dakota, is that right?
Yeah, we love that.
And if you want to check out that video that we did on him as well, we had a video that we did on him. Look, this was a top 40 team in both run and pass blocking on PFF last year. We'll see if they can kind of uh continue to block well. And I do think having Cooper Beebe is pretty brutal. On the left side, you also lost your left tackle as well, which we'll see if Kilty ends up playing left tackle, if that's what they want them to do. Um, Other than that, I feel okay about this offensive line. I feel decent. I don't think it needs to be the best in college football for it to be an effective offense, though, with how dynamic Avery Johnson is.
Yeah, I think it helps having a mobile quarterback. You can move the pocket. You can do fun things that you can also lighten the box in terms of changing numbers because you do have that threat of Avery Johnson that has to be accounted for every single play. And yeah, but they've also done a great job there. Their O line. I like Hadley Panzer. He was got at Big 12 Media Days. That was pretty fun to watch. I think he's really good coming back. Um, Carver Willis, is he a guy at right tackle? 7 starts last year, or I guess 7 starts in his career. But yeah, Connor Riley, he's promoted to OC. He's also the line coach. He's been with Kleiman since North Dakota State. He is really, really good at his job, and I trust. Like this is one of the programs that's like, oh, they got to replace Cooper Beebe, and they're not going to find a legit Cooper Beebe, right? But I do think I do trust them in the aggregate to be able to put together a workable offensive line and pair it with a scheme that matches the talent that is there and the skill positions. Because this year, I think it's a not significant, but I definitely think it's a noticeable upgrade in the skill positions than it was from a year ago.
Absolutely. Let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. Uh, I think defensive end's a good group. The run defense though was really brutal last year, and again, some of that has to do with we talk about the 3-3-5 so often here in the Big 12 because that's just the standard. But yeah, 5.1 yards per carry, letting up 160 yards allowed rushing per game. The thing about this defense though is I think they got some dudes on the defensive line, and we'll see. We'll see if that can translate, if they can take some jumps, if they can get better in that run game. And in such a run heavy conference, it's a concern, I think, for fans. It's a concern, I think, that I have of this team, but we'll see. I mean, am I wrong in saying that this defensive line is pretty decent?
I think it needs to improve from last year. I think it
It
will.
does.
I think you need a little bit more disruption than you got. There's not necessarily like an elite proven dude. I was super high on Khalid Duke last year. He kind of battled injuries. He didn't quite live up to what I thought he would produce for Kansas State. Does everybody else step up? I mean, Usus Siumalo, he's a guy that played a lot for you last year. He's a big dude at 6'3", 339.
I like
Yeah,
Brendan
you
Mott.
mentioned Brendan Mott. He's returning. He can be pretty good for you and disruptive. He created out well. He had almost 500 snaps last year, but you're gonna have other guys. Cody Stuffelban, right? Can he step up? He's 6'4", 250. He had a couple tackles for loss last year, in 300 snaps. I, like I said, it needs to improve, and I think it will. How much could be the difference between this team, winning a lot of games, hitting their over, and then making the college football playoffs?
Yeah. Fortunately, they had a pretty decent secondary last year because they did not get to the quarterback very often. They did not really stop the run. Uh, at the linebacker level, I mean, I'm hearing a lot of stuff that the beat writers really like Desmond Purnell.
Yeah, he was good last year. I think he was pretty good last year. I mean, he
Yeah,
played over 700 snaps. Him and Austin Moore, I think, are back. Austin Moore had 12 and a half tackles for loss. I think he can be disruptive. You bring in a guy, I think, from New Mexico, right? Alec Marenko. That's kind of fun. He's super raw. Obviously, he's going to be a little bit of a learning curve there coming over from the Mountain West, but they feel pretty good. And I want to throw out Asa Newsome, Asa Newsome, right? He was a guy out of high school. I just loved his tape. I really loved his tape. He was kind of an athlete, do it
young
all,
guy.
young guy. I think maybe he's not going to be this year, an alpha in that room, but in terms of spot duty here and there, third down, whatever it may be, I think he can give you some value this year and beyond.
I hope so. I hope so. Uh, let's let's get into the secondary then. Um, you lose a guy like Kobe Savage. You lose guys like Will Lee. Um, you lose also. Trying to look at my list here. I guess that those might be your headliners that you're losing. If they lost anyone else, just let me know because I'm not seeing it right here. But
I think
anyways,
that's yeah.
so is there still reason to believe that the secondary can still be okay?
Yeah, I think you've got a pretty good. I mean, yes, you lose Kobe Savage, but Marquis Siegel, that was a guy that Chris Kleiman was talking up as a legit NFL prospect there in the secondary. VJ Payne is returning as well. He's a nice little body type, 6'3", 206. He played 700 snaps last year. Um, I don't mind that at all. And then Jack Fabris, right? A young kid. We'll see what he can do at 6'2", 193. They obviously have a type there. Will Lee was a big dude as well. Uh, he only played 30 some snaps, but looked good in that limited role. Um, yeah, I mean, Kleiman is an All-American. He's an All-American for Marquis Siegel. Now, is that a little bit of coach speak potentially? But I do think that's it's not terrible. It's not terrible, and it's not like they had to look out to the portal to salvage a room. I mean, you bring in Tyler Nalone, I get that, but you've got Jacob Parrish, You've got Keenan Garber, right? Those are guys that returned and have been homegrown for them, or at least the last couple of years within your program, and you feel pretty good with the way you've recruited, the way you developed in that room, that you can replace some guys like Kobe Savage and Willie that are off to pretty damn good programs themselves.
All right, so as a team, and I always watch out for this every year, right? Because I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, they only let up 22 points per game. They were top 10 in turnovers as a defense last year, right? And we talk about the randomness of turnovers and how that is a number that can definitely regress year to year. So, Christopher, I ask you this. Does this defense improve from last year's defense overall, you think? Like, is this a better defense than it was last year?
Listen, I think like talent wise, and I think production in terms of down in and down out. Yes. Is the stats going to be the same? We'll see how opportunistic they are. We'll see how disruptive they are. I do think it's pretty impressive. It was actually really impressive that they could force all those turnovers with a pretty lackluster defensive line. And I think this year, if you get that step up in that D line, I think you can find some more opportunistic plays to create some turnovers, create havoc in the Big 12 here. And
They didn't really get anyone in the D line transfer wise, and they did. They got one, but I think this coaching staff, like me, kind of thinks that this group can take a step. I kind of do, but I still am very skeptical of the defense. I will say that. I'm not going to go. And when we'll look at the schedule right here. But the win total's at 9.5. I'm gonna tell you before I go through the schedule, I'm gonna be on the under because I am skeptical of this defense. I have yet to see what this offense is gonna look like. I have a feeling it should be good, and I trust that staff, and I trust Chris Kleiman. That guy knows how to win games. But double-digit wins is 10 wins, so different from 9 wins. It's crazy, right?
yeah,
Like you have to go play Arizona, right? But you get them at home. That's not a conference game, by the way. We've talked about that before. Be careful. Your out of conference also includes at Tulane.
yeah.
And I know people like talking about the coaching change there. That team is still crazy talented. Like they are probably the most talented team in the American. Memphis is up there with them as well. Uh, they are crazy talented. They're not a team to sleep on. They gave Ole Miss problems last year with a backup quarterback. So just do not sleep on Tulane, please. And John Summerall is a fantastic coach. So just do not sleep. They go to Provo, right? That's a game that you're like, okay, yeah, they'll probably win that game. Look, the elevation, going to Provo, it's not easy. Oklahoma State, they get at home. Colorado, another game they have at elevation, right? So interesting enough. At West Virginia, they have to go across the country for that. Kansas at home, they get at Houston. Then they get a bye week. Then they get Arizona State, Cincy, and then they go to Iowa State. So it is really good in terms of the teams that you pulled, right? But the elevation's a factor as right, plus the out of conference drawing Arizona and Tulane, I think as a factor. Um, I'm gonna be on the under 9.5.
Listen, I tend to agree with you, although I will say, like, I'm looking at their schedule, and a couple of their toughest opponents are going to be Kansas and Oklahoma State and Arizona, and those are
And
at home.
those are home. I do agree
I'm at
that
home.
that is a part of that for sure.
Really, really nice. And I mean, if you're going to play certain teams in the Big 12 on the road, right, it's probably wanting to be Houston, and it's probably going to be want to be BYU, right? And I guess maybe you could throw Arizona State in that game, that tier, but you also have them at home. And I don't know. I do think in terms of the Big 12 split of home and road, you have 5 road games, which is tough. And I guess this is the year that you get 5 road games instead of 4 road games, right? Because you play 9 conference games. So obviously you're gonna have one more than the other, depending on which way it falls in terms of home and away. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna lean under. I don't know if I have any action on this. I'm not gonna do any action on this because I think there's a lot of question marks up front defensively. Um, but I do think the upside is there with this offense, and if their O line it puts it together like I think it might, they could be really really dangerous explosively on offense, and then I guess we'll see how the defense holds its own. But yeah, I
Yeah,
just
I
think
mean, I don't trust the defense. I think it'll make improvements, but I don't. I think it can still improve on defense, but perform worse, if that makes sense. Like in terms of like it looks like on paper they performed really well because they just turned the ball over from other teams. People just gave them the ball. It's crazy. So I don't know. I and stop me when I name a team that isn't gonna run the ball a lot, right? Oklahoma State, BYU, West Virginia, Kansas, Arizona State, Cincinnati. I mean, like there are a lot of team Tulane. Did I already say that? I mean, there are a lot of teams on the schedule that are going to be very tuned in, locked in, and are going to be able to run the ball effectively. So, I'm gonna ride the under. Did you say you were going over, or did you say you're going
I said leaning under. Yeah.
leaning under? Okay, yeah, I'll take that as well. Just 10 wins is so many, you know.
I, I would not, and
Uh,
listen, we love the Big 12. I think there are some pretty good teams in it, but I would not be surprised if you told me there's not going to be a single 10-win team in the Big 12, just with the nature of everyone's schedule and kind
I,
of
I'd be a
beating up
little,
on each other.
I'd be a little surprised.
I
But I
do
mean,
I do think
I
it.
wouldn't be, I would not be as surprised as some other conferences, if that's what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.